Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma Gillespie.
I'm Billi FitzSimons.
Tensions around US immigration enforcement have escalated over the past week after a woman was shot and killed by a federal agent during a raid in the state of Minnesota. The shooting has sparked widespread protests and divided politicians as well as state and federal leaders.
This was an agent recklessly using power that resulted in somebody dying, getting killed. Long-term Minneapolis residents that have contributed so greatly to our city, to our culture, to our economy are being terrorized, and now somebody is dead.
As protests intensify, today we are going to explore what we know about the shooting that prompted the demonstrations, the government's response, and the growing controversy around US immigration enforcement operations.
And before we get into what exactly happened in the US state of Minnesota last week, I first want to give context about what exactly ICE is. I feel like over the past year or so since Donald Trump became president again, we have heard a lot more about ICE in the news.
Yeah.
Exactly what is that agency?
You're bang on there, Billi, that we have heard a lot about this agency in the past year. The agency is called ICE, as you mentioned, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Basically, it is a federal law enforcement agency in the US. It falls under the Department of Homeland Security. And ICE's main job is to enforce immigration laws inside the United States. So that includes, and what you've probably seen, are things like arresting and deporting people who are in the country illegally. ICE also investigate crimes like human trafficking and drug smuggling, and the agency was created after the September 11 attacks. That was part of a major reorganization of security agencies in the US, but ICE has pretty much been controversial since day one. There have been long-running debates around how aggressive their tactics should be and whether some of their operations overstep civil rights.
Okay, so ICE is not new, but their operations have really ramped up since Donald Trump became president. Like I said, I'm sure many of our listeners probably haven't even heard of them a few months ago, and now we are hearing about them all the time.
Yeah.
Why has there been so much recent discussion about ICE?
It's because, as you correctly point out, Billi, US President Donald Trump returned to office a year ago, and there has been a significant increase in immigration enforcement operations, and that is because this is something that Donald Trump campaigned really heavily on before his re-election. So border security was a key policy issue for him, and within his first days back in office, he signed multiple executive orders aimed at expanding immigration enforcement. Since then, that is why we've seen ICE conducting what it calls targeted enforcement operations in cities right across the United States. According to the Department of Homeland Security, the department that runs ICE, these operations are focused on people who have criminal records or outstanding deportation orders. But critics and opponents to ICE say the raids have been much broader and that they've created fear in immigrant communities. There have been reports of US citizens being wrongfully detained by ICE and deported, and videos of ICE raids showing agents using aggressive measures. Now, those tactics have sparked frequent protests over the past 12 months. And in 2025, ICE says it deported at least 600,000 people, but it should be noted that 32 people died in ICE custody last year. That makes it the agency's deadliest year in more than 2 decades.
Okay, so that's the context of ICE. And that brings us to what happened in Minnesota last week. They were the ones who carried out this operation that we have now seen all over social media.
Yeah.
Walk us through exactly what happened.
So last week, ICE said 2,000 of its agents were sent to the Minneapolis area to carry out, quote, the largest immigration operation ever. Minneapolis is a major city in Minnesota. It's also the same city where George Floyd was murdered by a police officer in 2020. On Wednesday, Homeland Security said rioters began blocking ICE officers and that this resulted in a federal officer shooting and killing a woman in her car. That woman was identified as Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother of 3.
And when I said before that we've now seen that all over social media, that's largely because there is actually footage of the shooting.
Exactly. Multiple bystanders did capture the incident on video, sharing it on social media, and that includes the shooting from multiple different angles, and that footage has really become central to the dispute around what actually happened. What the footage appears to show is an ICE officer approaching Good's car. She was in the driver's seat, and her car was stopped in the middle of a road in a neighborhood south of downtown Minneapolis. The officer demanded that she open the door. The officer grabs the handle of the car, and then the vehicle began to pull forward. There was a different ICE officer standing in front of it who pulled his weapon and immediately fired at least 2 shots in close range. Good was shot in the head, and her car then crashed into 2 parked cars before coming to a stop. That's what has been interpreted from the different angles and series of footage shared of the incident online.
And as you said before, ICE is a federal agency. This was a federal operation being carried out on behalf of the Trump administration. So what has Trump said about this shooting?
Hello, my name's Sam. I'm the co-founder of TDA. I'm just popping in to interrupt this video to ask if you could do one thing for me, and that is press subscribe on this YouTube channel. It's the best way to show us that you love what we do and that you're here for our future. And now, back to the deep dive.
Well, Trump and his entire administration are characterizing this as an act of self-defense. They have been quite aggressive in their defense on the ICE officer involved. So the Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, and President Trump, as well as others, have suggested that Good, the 37-year-old woman shot, used her car as a weapon to attack the officer who shot her in self-defense. Vice President J.D. Vance has also weighed in. He said the shooting was justified and that Good was a victim of, quote, left-wing ideology. Vance said, "I can believe that her death is a tragedy while also recognizing that it is a tragedy of her own making." Vance noted that the officer who killed Good was injured during a different arrest last year. He got his arm stuck in a car window, was dragged about 90 meters and had 50 stitches for his injury. The Department of Homeland Security has said that that officer has worked for more than 10 years as a deportation officer. He was selected for ICE's special response team for a reason. He has had additional training, and so they are really standing by that officer involved.
Okay, so federal officials are saying this was an act of self-defense and they support the actions taken by that specific agent. Then we move to the state officials and local officials. What have they said?
Their response, on the whole, really contradicts this messaging that we've heard from the White House. So first of all, there's Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. You may have seen video footage of him at a press conference that's now gone viral, and his account clearly goes against the federal government's account, and he said the video contradicts this argument of self-defense. He claims that the self-defense argument is, quote, garbage based on what the footage shows, and he's used really strong language. Here's a little bit of what the Minneapolis mayor had to say.
They are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is bullshit. To ICE, get the fuck out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite.
It's not often that you hear swearing in an official press conference like that.
Especially not out of the US, yeah.
I also saw that there's a dispute going on about who gets to investigate the shooting. What's happening there?
This has become a major point of contention, or another major point of contention in this story. So the FBI and the US Justice Department are conducting the investigation. That is standard when a federal officer uses deadly force. But Minnesota as a state also has its own agency that investigates officer-involved shootings. And they have been very clear that they want to be part of this investigation. But they've said they've been informed that the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and the Justice Department will not work with them. So basically, federal law enforcement has shut the state out from playing any role, according to state authorities. Homeland Security Secretary Noem said that the state has no jurisdiction in this case because it involves a federal officer. But the Minnesota Governor, Tim Walz, who you may remember as Kamala Harris's running mate, he has demanded that Minnesota play a role in this investigation. Walz pointed out that people in positions of power like the president, like Noem, like the vice president, have already passed judgment. They've already made statements that he says are, quote, verifiably false and verifiably inaccurate. inaccurate. So Waltz is concerned that a federal investigation will not be balanced. The Minneapolis mayor, Mayor Fry, he told the media, quote, "We want to make sure that there is a check of this administration to ensure that its investigation is done for justice, not for the sake of a cover-up."
Okay, so that's the political response. But what about the community response? Because so often in incidents like this, there is a huge community response. I mean, one person in this local neighborhood has been killed.
Yeah, there's been a really significant protest movement that's come out of Minneapolis. As I mentioned, this is a city where there is particular sensitivity around law enforcement violence, as the city where George Floyd was murdered infamously in 2020. Early protests took place at the scene of the shooting and outside of federal immigration offices. Demonstrators there were shouting slogans like "No more ICE" and "Go home Nazis." And in response, we saw federal officers using tear gas, deploying pepper spray to disperse crowds. The Minneapolis School District cancelled classes in response for the remainder of last week as a precaution. And local authorities say they're working with community leaders to try to keep protests peaceful. The mayor told reporters that the Trump administration could be looking for an excuse to come in with militarized force to, quote, "further occupy our streets and to cause more chaos." So really, really high tensions there, and an escalation or a concern of further escalation and that friction between federal and local authorities.
And I think it's fair to say that whilst there are protesters in the community and in the state at the moment, this has now gone far beyond just that community. There have been protests all over the country now.
Absolutely. The death of Good has really resonated across the country. As you mentioned, Billi, there have been protests taking place or planned in many large US cities. On Friday afternoon, our time, we heard from Portland police, who confirmed that 2 people were hospitalized following a shooting involving federal agents in the state of Oregon. Portland Police Chief Bob Day said, quote, "We understand the heightened emotion and tension many are feeling in the wake of the shooting in Minneapolis, but I am asking the community to remain calm." And that's certainly a sentiment that we are seeing echoed across many US states.
It feels like, I mean, this already is a huge political story, but it feels like it's only going to become bigger from here.
Yeah, and especially after what has now been an entire year of attention, concern around these immigration raids, I think we're going to continue to see this shooting become a focal point in this much larger debate about immigration in the US.
And thank you for taking us through that.
Thank you for having me, Billi.
And thank you for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We'll be back this afternoon with your evening headlines, but until then, have a good day.